Hi, everyone. So what we're looking at here is a view from my deck on Thursday, the 22nd of July, when we had our second snow of the winter, really early this year. And so as I sit on my deck and I watch the weather unfold, it brings me such great joy to not only understand the weather systems scientifically, but also to know that the astrology is configured to reflect weather systems. And let's just have a look at how old weather astrology is. It's at least 3,500 years old. Clay tablets have been found from ancient Mesopotamia with observations going back to the 17th century before the current era. One of them is called the Book of Anu and Enlil, of Earth and Heaven. And so weather astrology has a rich history and it's a big subject. And we're also in some quite good company as regards being a weather astrologer. Aristotle spent many years doing research and doing signatures and things. Kepler was a weather astrologer. More recently, we had Dr. Pierce from the UK, George McCormack from the United States, and the latest professional weather astrologer that I know of is Carolyn Egan, who died in 2015. And I was lucky enough to find her while she was still alive. And I got her book and I joined up with her group of astrologers from around the world, weather astrologers. And she opened the door to weather astrology for me. And she was very professional about her approach to weather astrology. She really was dedicated. Okay, so what we've got here is a huge topic with many, many signatures. There are different methods, and we've only got an hour. So in this talk, we're going to keep it really simple. And I am busy putting together a course. So if anybody's interested, let me know via email. And once my course is ready, I can drop you a mail and you can see if you'd like to join in. Right. Weather astrology can be done many, many years in advance, and that's why it's called long range. And that's where the advantage is over these modern computer models, which basically change all the time and, literally look forward about 2 weeks. And so we have this great advantage in that people prepare almanacs for farmers even to this day, and they do it a whole year in advance. We can, as weather astrologers, we can also produce warnings for hurricanes, for major floods, for storms. And so, there's some great good work that we can do because people can plan if they know that things are coming up for their part of the world. There is a fair amount of work involved, even in the basic technique, which I'm going to show you today. So, it's not something that you can do in 5 minutes, and it really is something that you've got to put your heart and soul into if your aim is to produce almanacs and hurricane warnings and that kind of thing. There are some aspects which are very easy to do, and I'm going to show you how to look at the weather on the day of a wedding, which is not such a huge amount of work and can be very helpful to your clients. Alrighty, the rewards are that you can actually test your predictions because your weather is done locally and you are there. You get to experience what actually happened and you can test it against what you predicted. It can also, weather astrology can also enhance your natal and horary, because you get such archetypal pictures of the planets and even the signs. Makes life more interesting, and it's amazing how weather astrology mirrors the political. And I'm going to give you an example from earlier this month. So here in Karatra, that's the nearest little village to where I stay, there were vicious winds that came out of the west in the early hours. And this is the damage that happened on a neighboring farm. This was a big wooden growing hut, and you can see it's just been ripped apart and lying in shreds, and all of this guy's an organic farmer, all these beautiful seedlings were just scattered to the four winds. So that happened on the 1st of July. And I am not the heaviest sleeper, and when this howling gust came through on the 1st of July, I had my phone next to me off, but I switched it on and I popped onto my astrology program. And at 2:50 a.m. on the 1st of July, this is what I saw. We had Saturn on the upper angle. We had Uranus heading for the ascendant in the first house. And we had Mars partile opposition Saturn. And Saturn at 12, Uranus at 13. So Mars was, it became exact. It perfected that aspect on the 1st, when that first howling wind came through. And then what had happened, Mars moved along to 13, where it perfected the square with Uranus. And Mars, with this kind of weather astrology, you use a 1 degree orb. Mars, you give a 2 to 3 day orb. 2 to 3 days either side of the event, it will still be in force. And so what happened is, night after night, roughly 2, 3 in the morning, these howling gales used to come through, and they lasted, a good few hours. It was quite vicious weather. And mirroring that, so the exact dates, remember, were 1st of July and 4th of July. So on the 29th of June, the Constitutional Court handed this very controversial judgment down to Zuma, that he had to be imprisoned for 15 months. That was the 29th of June. So that was still in orb of the 1st of July. And then on the 7th of July, which would be, 3 days after that Mars perfecting the square with Uranus, Zuma, very surprisingly to many people, actually handed himself in. And, we all saw the drama and the protests by his supporters and so on. So it's just a very quick snapshot to show you how the weather, because you're watching the sky, you're watching the weather, and then you can just tune into major headlines and you'll be amazed at how often these things, and, Mars is a very important player in weather, and Saturn and Uranus likewise. We'll go into details now. So the basic techniques is, first of all, weather systems in general move west to east. And why is that? Because the Earth rotates from west to east. So that's normal weather. And then if you want to become a weather astrologer, you need to know the local weather. Weather's predicted locally. Or if you want to predict for another continent, you need to know what the weather is season after season. You need to understand that before you can do your predictions. Then you need to understand planet signs and aspects in terms of weather, and we're going to go into that. In the southern hemisphere, you use the southern tropical zodiac, and I'm going to explain why. Have a look here. This is a declination graph, and basically this line in the middle is the equator of the Earth projected up into the sky, called celestial equator. Down at the bottom here at 23 degrees, 26 minutes south, you have what's called the southern tropic. Up at 23 degrees, 26 north, the northern tropic. The southern tropic runs approximately through the Kruger Park, and the northern tropic, I forget where it goes through. I'll have to look that up. Okay, so tropic tropical comes from the word tropos in Greek, and it means a turning point. So the tropical zodiac is a zodiac based on the turning points of the sun. And it is, in fact, the seasonal zodiac, because this zodiac defines the seasons. And we know that here we're shivering away in our our winter here in South Africa, and if you headed off to France and Spain and England, they're in summer. So there are definitely opposite seasons on opposite sides of our globe. So let's have a look. When the sun is at 0 degrees declination on the equator, you get equal day, equal night. And I've chosen to start this thing with the southern spring. So that happens around about the 21st of September each year. And from there, the sun moves southwards until around about 21, 22 December. It is maximally south. It's at its turning point. We get the longest day, shortest night in the south. We get the shortest day, longest night in the north. Back up to the 0 degree equinox. And here is our northern turning point. In the north, in the south, the longest night, shortest day. In the north, shortest night, longest day. Okay, so this is our spring. Then our summer, southern autumn, southern winter. And so for the southern tropical zodiac, we start with Aries, Nord Aries at the start of spring. The seasons always start with a cardinal to initiate the season. Then we have a fixed sign that holds the intensity and the height of the season. And then we have a mutable to transition from season to season. So this is just the zodiac: Aries, Taurus, Gemini. Our summer starts with cardinal Cancer, Leo, Virgo. Our autumn starts with cardinal Libra, Scorpio, Sag. Our winter is a cardinal Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. And it's the reverse in the north. So for weather astrology, these signs are configured to these seasons. And so every book that I've read, and I have great respect for McCormack, state that you need to do that. Okay, and so what do we need? We do the cardinal ingress for the season. We then do lunar quarter charts for the whole season. So that's normally about 13 of them. And then we do the Mercury charts. So your cardinal sun ingress charts give you the overall picture for the whole season. It's like the birth of the season. Your lunar quarter charts are predominantly for rain because Moon is your rainy planet. You can also fine tune the other temperatures and winds, and your Mercury is your windy planet. And so that's why you look at Mercury ingresses and Mercury stationaries. Okay. Now onto the signs. So shortcut, so that we don't have to labor our way through all the signs. Fire signs are generally hot and dry. Water signs are generally cold to cool, and wet. And air signs are generally windy. So for each symbol, I look at temperature, wind factor, moisture factor, and then violence, because with weather astrology, we're looking out for these storms so we can warn people. Okay, so Aries, it's violent, okay, because it's ruled by Mars, which is violent. We're going to come to that in a minute. Our Taurus, which is the intensity of spring, brings us growing rains, but moderate temperatures and so on. But because of Venus, it's an earth sign, which is generally dry, if we remember from our astrology, but with being Venus as Lord, brings growing rains. Gemini is the most windy. It's cool and dry, and you're transitioning from spring into summer. Okay, summer starts with cardinal Cancer. It's cool because it's a water sign. It's very wet, ruled by the Moon, which is our rain planet. And we can get violent downpours. Leo, the violence comes out of electrical storms. Our Virgo is very, very blustery. It's an earth sign, but it's mutable, which means it's changeable, and it's ruled by Mercury, which adds the wind factor. In autumn, Libra is very windy. Again, it's an air sign. And Scorpio, we are looking at violent winds. It's often part of a hurricane tornado signature, and you get extremes. You get extreme cold or extreme heat. You get extreme drought or extreme downpours. Sagittarius, it's middle of the road and pleasant weather, and often pleasant outdoor weather. Onto winter, our Capricorn, the coldest. It's cardinal, so it really brings that cold in big time, and it's destructive. It brings unseasonal weather. So it's weather that's contrary. It's ruled by Saturn, which is a malefic, and Saturn brings unseasonable weather. Okay. You can get droughts, floods, storms. Aquarius, it's the second coldest to Capricorn. It is fixed, but it's air. So that, I think, makes it a little bit warmer than the earthy Saturn-ruled sign. It can bring electrical disturbances, lightning. Pisces, here is our transition sign. It's cool, it's moderate wind, but it brings good rains. It brings farmers' rains. Okay, right. Now let's have a look at our planets. Our sun is, as we would expect, warm and dry, and generally still regarding wind. The violence factor with the sun is lightning. Moon is our rain planet, and then it's cool and breezy. Here are our benefics, and they bring good things. As I said, so archetypal. Venus brings good rains. Otherwise, it moderates the temperature. It's mild. It brings mild breeze. Jupiter brings pleasant temps, pleasant breezes, but it's on the dry side. And so it's good outdoor weather if you've got a big occasion coming up, big outdoor occasion. Okay, onto malefics. We've got Mars and Saturn. Mars is hot and dry, but it's also turbulent. You know, Mars is the god of war, so there is turbulence associated with it. The atmosphere is in conflict, you know, like rising and ascending air currents. Now, Mars is part of a signature for droughts and very much so for fires, and it can bring storm winds. Now, our greater malefic, Saturn, is the opposite. It's cold. Both of them can bring extreme temps, but, you know, archetypally cold. It's usually still, except in big storms when it can bring blizzards. It's very wet. And so these are contrasting planets. And when you put Mars and Saturn together, weather-wise, you've got trouble. And Saturn in weather astrology called stormy Saturn, not with very good reason. Mercury is our very windy planet. Otherwise, it's cold, cool, and dry. Very much influenced by the planets it's aspecting and so on, much like in natal astrology. Uranus, these are our invisible malefics. Now, they're all cool. Uranus, it can bring gusts, like I mentioned at the start of the talk, those hectic gusts that came powering through and ripped branches of trees and destroyed buildings. It brings cloudbursts. It brings hail when it's configured with Saturn. It does electrical damage. It's erratic. It's also called a record breaker. Neptune is freak weather. You either can, it's like in natal weather, we think of it as a sea mist. It brings poor visibility. You get dust storms. You can get mists and fog and weird animals and weird things raining out of the sky. Pluto is destructive, and you can get enduring winds, not like the squalls, the blustery gusts of Uranus. These things are just wind that just takes things out. Steady drizzle. With Saturn, you get sleet and cloudbursts. So onto aspects. In weather, we only look at applying aspects because that's what's going to come. The separating aspects have already happened, much like in horary. Okay. Our conjunction and our parallel of declination, and I'll explain that as we go through the slides. Basically, those are two planets in the same declination, the same distance, north or south, but they're both north, both south of the celestial equator. It's the most powerful, and you assess it from the combination of planet and sign. Our hard aspects are violent. They disturb the atmosphere, especially with the conflicting planets. So with Mars opposite Saturn, you got trouble. And that was what I showed you. Now, it's your Harmo eights, opposition square, semi-square, square, quadrate, as well as the contraparallel. And all contraparallel is if one planet's at 15 degrees south, the other planet is at 15 degrees north of that celestial equator. Our soft aspects, they bring nice weather, fair weather. That's a sextile trine. They can, however, be overwhelmed by malefics. So if you have Mars in sextile with Uranus or Pluto, watch out, because they are going to make life difficult. Okay, here's our first example. I've chosen an iconic South African weather event. It's the flood that happened at Laingsburg. Actually happened 40 years ago, and 104 people died. It was huge. This is a tiny little dorpy in the Karoo. 23 businesses were destroyed, and I'd say about 80% of the houses were just washed away. And they found bodies as far away as Mossel Bay down at the coast. So this was huge. What happened? It was a black southeaster. And I'm using this with permission from Dr. Horan from the weather blog. And what happened is there was a cold front, and behind the cold front, the winds came in. But there was a ridge of high pressure, like an atmospheric mountain peak, that directed the wind around this mountain here in the Atlantic and forced it. Now, normally, as I said, the seasonal weather comes from the west. This weather came pouring in from the southeast, and it came across the warm ocean here, picked up masses of moisture. What happened? This is a ranges of mountains, the Langeberg, Swartberg, Witberg, and this is the dry side, the Karoo. We know it's dry and hot. And here, this is at the coast. George is at the coast. Okay. So what normally happens is the moisture clouds come in, they get pushed up, or the moisture winds come in there. They form clouds, and George is delightfully green. But on this day, on the 24th and the 25th, this high pressure pushed these winds so hard that it pushed the moisture winds right over the mountain, and it fell in the rain shadow. And 40 centimeters of rain falls. Now, normally like 5 centimeters is pretty nice. And this was 40 centimeters. It was huge. And it was summer. There's January. It was high summer. It was hot. And what happened was the ground fell on this parched earth that didn't absorb it. These streams converged, and 3 little streams, which were normally trickles, filled up, and they met just before Laingsburg and became a mighty torrent. It was 6 meters wide, and the height of the flood was over a person's head. So we're probably looking at about 2 meters, 2.5 meters high, and it surged through the town. So what does the astrology say? Okay, so the very first thing we have to do is we got to find the correct ingress. Now it's summer. So our summer ingress is the southern tropical Cancer. And this is it. There's the sun at North Cancer. It's drawn for Laingsburg. Like I said, weather is local. So this will tell us for the whole season. So the method is you've got to examine the 4th house. That counts 50% of your judgment for the season. The 1st house counts 25%. Planets in the 7th and 10th each count 12.5. That's a quarter of your assessment. And then you've got to look at the planet that defines this chart, which in this case, it's a solar ingress. You've got to examine the sun. Right. So if we look at the sign on the cusp of the 4th, it's Aries, it's hot and dry. We've got Sagittarius on the 1st, hot and dry. So when you see that, you can say overall, the season is going to be hotter and drier than average. And so it was, Langsberg had had very, very little rain at the time just before these floods. Okay, so that's the first point. Then we've got to examine the Lord of this 4th house, and that's Mars. And Mars we find in rainy Cancer. We also, in the house, we find Jupiter, which brings our pleasant weather, except notice that Jupiter's at 8 and Saturn, it's applying to a conjunction with stormy Saturn, which is fallen in Aries. So, and when the planets are fallen and detrimented, they behave badly. So we've got a nasty storm planet. And we also have destructive Pluto. So we are alerted that something nasty could happen in this summer from December, January, February, up until about the 20th of March. Okay. Now we cast our eyes. Oh, the other thing to notice is that Mars, which is L4, is in an applying square with Pluto. Okay. And these are two malefics, more reason to just pay attention here. In the 1st house, we find the rainy moon. It's not in a rainy sign, it's in Sagittarius, but it's 29 degrees, which means it could be changing sign pretty soon. And it's heading into stormy, cold Capricorn. So we've got quite a lot of indications. Let's go and have a look what's happening in our angular houses. And here you don't have to worry so much about signs. It's more just the planet. So we've got freaky Neptune. So this is a weather chart for the whole season. So we know summertime or other, there could be some freak weather. And we have windy Mercury, and it is in windy Gemini. We might as well notice that, it rules it. So there's wind to be expected. And the 7th house also contains our sun. So, and that adds more heat. Okay, so now, to find timing, we actually have to do dynamic event reports. And I did that for the solar ingress. And what I noticed on the 24th of January, Jupiter stationed retrograde. And on the 26th of January, Pluto stationed retrograde. So these two big planets stationing, they bracketed this massive storm. And so the weather textbooks do state to pay attention to stations, to maximum north declination, maximum south, and crossing the equator. So there are more factors to consider than what we're used to for natal and horary and so on. All right, and then what also happened, remember we had the moon up in the 1st house. Now in a season, the moon roughly moves 3 signs. So by the 25th of January, the moon had actually moved down and it conjuncted the IC, the 4th house cusp of this ingress chart. That happened on the 25th of Jan. And thereafter, on the same day, it went on to conjunct Jupiter. And after that, to conjunct Saturn. And then finally, on the 27th, it conjuncted Pluto. So here you can see the moon highlighting why the 4th cusp is so important. It's the land beneath our feet. It's farmland. It's the land of the towns. It's the land of the country. So that's why it's given such huge priority. So those were the main markers of the storm. Right, let's take a look at the moon chart. So what you do I know the date, so I'm just looking for the nearest moon. And the nearest moon was a full moon on the 20th of Jan, 1981. It did happen to be a lunar eclipse. And in the southern tropical zodiac, it was in Aquarius. So with all the charts, you use the same rules, 50% for the 4th, 25% for the 1st, quarter for the planets in 7 and 10, and quarter for the planet that's rules the chart, what kind of chart it is. Okay, nothing in our fourth house, but we've got Sagittarius here, so that tells us warm and dry. But notice that this is 16 degrees Sagittarius. Mars is at 16 degrees of Leo. And Mars is quite powerful and ferocious in Leo in weather astrology. So we've got this potent warlike Mars, and it's in a trine. But you can see now the trine can be overwhelmed by the nature of the planet. So there's turbulence that configures in here onto this land, right? Nothing in the first house, but we've got Virgo there, which is cool and dry. So we've got mixed. Sometime, this is a 7-day period. It holds until the next moon quarter, which will be our third quarter. And yeah, so we've got mixed, cool and warm. And Virgo also brings in blustery. But mainly we're looking at this for rain. Okay, planets in the seventh, nothing, because by the 3-degree rule, the Jupiter has now gone past Saturn. They are in the 8th. And in our 10th, we have freaky Neptune. So we can read that as freak rain. We also have Venus in the sign of Cancer, a rainy sign and a rainy planet. Okay. Our moon is in the sign of Aquarius, which isn't a very rainy sign, but it's ruled by Saturn because it's in the Aquarius. So Saturn's our eclipse lord, and Saturn brings weather from the east. Remember, like I said, the weather's normally west to east, but with Saturn involved and out of kilter planets, detrimented fallen, they bring unseasonal weather. So stormy Saturn brings weather out of the east. And then we can similarly, for this little chart, we can do dynamic event reports. And we find that on the 24th of January, 1981, the moon in Pisces opposed this eclipse, the lunar eclipse ascendant. Ascendant and MC and IC are the most important points for activating weather and timing it. And then on the 25th of January, we had transiting Venus, which is rain, in Cancer, more rain, and that applied sextile to the ascendant. So even though it was a sextile, there was a lot more rain than normal. It could be considered a good rain, but given the context of Langsberg and the dryness, it wasn't good at all. Okay, here we have a look at our declination. Okay, so there is our celestial equator. This here is the date, the 24th. And what we've got going on here is, okay, let's take a look at the moon first of all. So our moon had come up. There was the lunar eclipse, that chart we looked at on the 20th of Jan. The moon was in the northern declination. And on the 24th of Jan, the moon was parallel to Pluto. And so there is another conjunction, moon with destructive Pluto. On the 25th of Jan, the moon went through the celestial equator. And in weather astrology, that's an important thing to note. So these maximums and the celestial equators can bring rain. And then also on the 25th, the moon went down here and it went parallel to Saturn. Another stormy Saturn, so it sparked that. The moon, the orb of the moon, literally the moon travels 12.5 degrees a day. So in 1 degree, it takes about 2 hours to do 1 degree. So it's 2 hours either side. So for a 4-hour period, this thing holds force. And just a last thing to note, on the 24th of Jan, the moon went parallel Uranus, which is erratic, record-breaking, and so on. And at the same, not the moon, Mars. So turbulent Mars did a declination parallel to Uranus, and there's trouble for you as well. Okay. And yeah, what I wanted to just mention to you, the maximum turning point of the sun is 23-26. That's the maximum it's going at the moment. If a planet goes outside that, it's called out of bounds and it behaves badly. Now, before this Langsberg storm happened, we had the Mercury out of bounds. So prior to this big flood in Langsberg, there were winds that were, could have been behaving badly. Okay, right. So there we go with that. And here's our final little practical example of our wedding. So what do we look for? The green flags are Jupiter brings good outdoor weather, except it mustn't be in Cancer and Pisces, and they say Aquarius. Mercury sextile Venus brings nice weather. Sun trine Jupiter brings nice weather, because Sun is warm, Jupiter's warm, as long as Venus isn't in a terribly rainy sign as well. Okay. So, but there are much more red flags to watch out for. So what we have here, we must avoid full moon and new moon, especially eclipses, because that can bring big rain. Another thing that we do in weather, which we don't very much do in natal astrology, is the perigees and the apogees and so on. But you're going to watch out for them. Perigee means the moon closest to Earth. When there's a G behind it, that's Earth. Peri, close. So that happened. The moon will be closest Earth on the 21st of July and the 17th of August. And yeah, pretty much, once a month, you get a perigee. And then your supermoon is your perigee, but your maximum perigee. And in 2021, there are two, and they've already happened. 26 April, 26 May, and they can bring severe storms along with earthquakes and whatnot, especially if there happen to be eclipses as well. You also don't want moon at max declination, especially the southern tropic for southern hemisphere, or zero declination. You don't want a declination traffic jam. So like if there's a whole lot of lines bunching up together, that's going to bring turbulent weather. You don't want out of bounds planets. They behave badly. You don't want stationary planets because they seem to be involved with stormy conditions. You don't want Sun conjunct Saturn is a very famous signature for cold. So if you don't want your guests freezing and shivering, make sure that the Sun isn't going to conjoin Saturn on the day. Anything with Saturn isn't going to be any prominent Saturn isn't going to be too much fun. You don't want your malefics in the angles, if at all possible, especially 1 and 4. Okay, and especially Saturn, because of the cold factor. And like I mentioned at the start, you don't want like warrior Mars translating a major aspect pattern like the Uranus-Saturn square that's happening at the moment for this whole year. And you don't want transiting Mercury in hard aspects to malefics or to the IC or the AC of the season, well, mainly of the lunar quarter chart. Okay, so this is mainly lunar quarter, and you can also look at the actual weather, the actual wedding chart. But there, you don't want howling wind. You don't want the bride's veil to blow away and so on. Okay. So what I've done, I've set this wedding at Karatra, which is a little village very close to where I stay on a farm, and for the 17th of July this year. So we look for the cardinal ingress that's closest. We know this is winter, so we know the cardinal sign that starts the winter is Capricorn. If the wedding is in some gorgeously remote space, you'll look for the town closest to that and use that as a quick rule of thumb. You are going to use a southern, okay, and then, yeah, just, you can look at this. You soon enough get used to this, but here we can see it's winter. We've got to look for the Capricorn ingress. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to hop out of here And I'm going to head off to my astrology program, and just give me a moment. And I'm going to show you what you have to do. Okay, so the first thing, I just want to turn the spotlight off. Okay. Okay. Right. Now, to get the Southern Tropical Zodiac, we recently got given a nice workaround, because there isn't a Southern Tropical Zodiac in Solar Fire yet. So what we do is we are going to head off to preferences. Okay, so what am I doing here? I'm going to preferences, edit settings. I'm going to the zodiac. I'm going to use the sidereal zodiac. It's a specialist form of the sidereal zodiac. And then you drop the list down, and there's a whole load of different ionumses. And ionumsa just means the difference between the two zodiacs. And you choose SVP, which is solar vernal point, the solar spring point. And for the southern hemisphere, for the northern hemisphere, the SVP, solar spring point, is Naught Aries. And you'll see it's set by default to that. However, we are going to set it for the south. And what they told me to do is very simple. They said, just edit this thing. And so instead of naught, you go 1, keep the degree in, change Aries to Libra LI, 41 minutes and 20 seconds. That's what I found worked. The reason for these little bits and pieces is that this vernal point is set for 1900, 1st of Jan 1900, and the vernal point slips back. That's what calls precession of the axes, which you learn about in astrology. Okay, so what do we have here? We are going to create a dynamic event report. Okay, so and I can show you also how to create the ingresses and so on. So I'm going to speed things up by just having some stuff ready and waiting. Just give me a moment. There's already. Okay, and we're going to go for the. Let me just do it. Okay, so to find an ingress, you just go chart, return an ingress, and then you make sure that the place is right. You can do natal or relocated. This wedding I've set for Karatra, so I can keep it at natal or relocated. That stays at Karatra. And I want the current ingress. So let me just make this 17th of July 2021, because that's our wedding. And we'll just put it at 3 p.m. for now. We can always shift it a little bit earlier if need be. Okay, we say the current ingress. We want advanced in ingress. You go here, you say advanced of the sun. You say the position must be, and remember now we're in the southern tropical zodiac, so we are looking for North Capricorn. We go okay, and voila, we have the sun at North Capricorn, and we can read this ingress graph. Okay, so what do we find here? Let's just get my little spotlight back. Okay, what we find is we find Gemini on the 4th house. So okay, so we've got our wedding drawn up for 2 o'clock on the 17th of July. And we know it's a first quarter moon. Okay, so let's do our ingress. To do that, very simple. and remember we're using our SVP at 1 Libra 41 minutes 20 seconds. So we go return and ingress. We've got our wedding there, so we use that, and we can say natal or relocated will be fine. And we say the current, we want advanced and ingress, and it's the solar ingress, and we want it to go into 0 Capricorn. Remember, we're doing southern tropical zodiac, so it's winter, so the cardinal is Capricorn. Go okay, and voila, we have got and there, this is SVP 014120 tells us, Libra tells us that this is the southern tropical zodiac. So what we have here, let's have a look at our 4th house cusp. We've got Pisces. That tells us cool and rainy. Sagittarius tells us warm and dry. So we know for this winter, which is always cold here in the garden route, it's going to be mixed. There are going to be cooler, wetter days, and they're going to be hotter, drier days. And I can only tell you so far, what's generally been happening is we've had warm days, warm, dry days, and then cool, damp evenings. So there's an example of that playing out. No planets in the 4th, but we do have Jupiter as L4. And note that Jupiter is stationary. So that means that Jupiter is behaving a little bit out of sorts. Jupiter in the southern tropics is in Virgo. In other words, it's in detriment. So again, even though it's a benefic, it's a little bit of an iffy benefic. And it similarly rules the ascendant. So and then you can take note of the applying aspects. So does Jupiter have? Yes, Jupiter is applying trine to the sun, and Jupiter is, that's it. Okay, and it's applying square to the ascendant. Okay, so we can just note that sun adds heat. All right. So in our 1st house, we find windy Mercury. It's retrograde, and it's also in detriment. So it's another planet. So it's windy, but it's winds that aren't going to be so great. Okay. But look, it's for the whole season. So timing, as I say, we drew from events, event reports, and so on. Then nothing in the 7th. We've got freaky Neptune sitting up here at the top of the chart in the 10th. I use Placidus houses. That seems to be what's done by most of the weather astrologists. So I've just carried on with that for now. Okay. So there is our overall picture. And then we have to also examine the sun. What's the sun doing? Well, the sun is trine the moon. But that's separating, so we ignore that. The sun is trine Jupiter, and that's it. That's the only applying aspects that within orb that we've got here. Obviously, if we stretch it beyond, the sun's applying to Venus, and so on. So that's our picture. Okay, so that's how we do our solar ingress. How do we get a lunar quarter chart? Very simple. So we go back to our wedding, we go here, we say we want lunations, lunar phases, make sure it's Karatra, make sure we can keep the wedding date, and we go transiting lunar phases, and then we can come down to our wedding is on the 17th at 2. Now the 1st quarter of the moon starts at 12:10. So we can pick that. And there we have it. And that is also in our southern tropical zodiac. And so let's take a closer look. We have 0 degrees Leo on the cusp of the 4th, with stormy Saturn in the house. we have 0 degrees of, oh, for some reason this is doing whole sign. Sorry, cancel that. Let us return to our wedding, which is Placidus, and we want the lunar phases. Don't know why it's giving us whole sign, you know. Okay, I'm just going to edit this. Solify has its own strange behavior. I'm going to edit it and I'm going to tell it I want Placidus. Thank you very much. Right, there we go. All righty. Okay, so here we have Cancer on the 4th house cusp by Placidus, because the whole sign puts the midheaven and ascendant inside the house. We're using it to define the house. So, and we've got destructive Pluto. Thankfully, Saturn for this quarter is not in the 4th house. Lord of this is rainy moon. And the ascendant is in Taurus, which is cool. But remember, because of Venus, it also brings rain. And up in the 10th, up in the 7th, we've got erratic and record-setting Uranus. And up in the 10th, we've got the sun, which brings heat. Okay, so what we do, and then the last, okay, yeah, I think while we're here, then we're going to look at the event reports. Let's look at the declinations. I can just show you how to do that. Just handy to, if you haven't worked with this much, it's very simple to do. So I want to go to this first quarter moon with Placidus. You go dynamic, you go for the graphic ephemeris, and you say you want a 30-degree declination. I've chosen 8 days from, so roughly to correspond with that moon quarter, and off I go. So here is our, okay, let me just quickly, I'm going to annotate this for you. Okay, so oopsie, let's just, I want to draw. Thank you very much. Okay, so here is our, oh, why is it giving me grid lines? Okay, right. Oh, it's still giving me grid lines. Okay. I'm going to have to just, let's spotlight it for you. Okay, so don't know why, must be Solify, but okay, let me just show you with the mouse. There's our 0 declination. Here is our moon tracking down towards the south, and here's our full moon over here. Okay. Right. So that's how you do this. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually going to hop out of here. We're going to return to our slides. And because I've got everything on the slides to show you. Okay. Our dynamic events reports I've put on here just for ease of working with. So if we look, this is the lunar quarter. So let's take a look at the 17th. We've got moon parallel and Neptune very, very early, 1 in the morning. So that'll be over long before the wedding starts. All this actually happens before the quarter begins. The quarter actually begins here at 12:10. But look, let's just notice that the moon is sextile Mars at 7 in the morning. So there could be a little bit of turbulence going on. And the moon is trine Venus at 11, a little bit of rain, but it's a sextile, nothing hectic. But here at 12, the moon is square the sun, so that brings heat. And our moon is trine Pluto at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and squaring Pluto, and it is trining Jupiter. Now, note the moon is going to aspect lots of planets in the 7-day period. So you don't pay gigantic amount of attention. You just can notice them and remember it's like 2.5 hours either side that thing holds sway. So it could cool down a little bit in the afternoon, but we have got our Venus brings pleasant weather, our Mars brings warm weather. It's not looking too bad for the 17th. Yeah, and later that day, at 10 o'clock that night, the moon conjoins the ascendant. And then let's just look at the 18th, okay? The sun opposed Pluto on the 18th. Now, the sun is a more potent planet as a transiting planet because it's slower. And so there's heat, okay? Pluto, yeah, not always the best in the West because there is an element of destructiveness, could be. But that's in the middle of the night, so we're not that terribly concerned. And again, remember the sun is a day either side. So that middle of the night could still hold sway over this day and the 18th, okay? Then our moon sesquiquadrates Neptune at 10 in the morning. Our Mercury is in a Harmo 8, semi-square with Venus. But as the most potent are the conjunction square opposition. These are slightly less potent. So we don't expecting a howling gale here. It's also Venus, so it's a benefic. Our moon is parallel Jupiter, which is good. It's trining Mercury, so that the trine softens the whole thing. It squares Saturn at 3:45 in the afternoon, opposes Uranus at 8 at night. Okay, so we know, I mean, this is not bad, okay? We don't have like a major Mars, Uranus. We don't have that. And so as it turned out, oh yeah, this is just later on. Okay. As it turned out, it was a pleasant day. The 17th was warm most of the day, and the 18th was actually hot. So you could, that influence of Sun Pluto was definitely real. Okay, so 17th actually turned out to be a fine day. And as you can see, on the 17th, there were only moon aspects, so that was not too bad. And our wedding would have been fine. What I want to show you is, because this is this week, okay? So, and this is our declination graph that I showed you how to do, but here I've actually marked it up. So on the 17th, the moon was parallel Neptune as well as being in aspect with it, but that was very early in the day. 18th, moon parallel Jupiter, which brought lovely warmth as well. Now, on the 19th, we had this first, we remember that big cold front, there were weather alerts being sent out all over the country. And so on the 19th, the moon paralleled Saturn. And in the afternoon of the 19th, the cold arrived. It was cold and gray skies. From here on these 2 days, it was clear skies and warm and lovely. And so that was moon parallel Saturn. And when the moon paralleled Pluto, that's when the second front started to arrive. And by the 22nd, then notice what happens. So I've drawn this line in here for the maximum declination of the sun. And notice that the moon, rainy moon, went out of bounds. And honestly, we had loads of rain. And on the 22nd, we had that snow, which is what I showed you right in the very beginning. Snow on the mountain up, higher up, that's where we were. And this right up until the 24th, which is the date of the new moon, which is yesterday, okay? We had our full moon in the early hours of yesterday, of Saturday, the 24th. And that brought the end of this front, and we experienced another lovely warm day, and the moon was moving back out of bounds, back into normality. So, this declination definitely tells us a great deal. yeah, so there we have it in action. And also not all the planets were clustered on this side of the ephemeris. We've definitely got planets not on the ephemeris of the celestial equator. So we've got like roughly half the planets down here and half the planets up there. And yeah, so that's how you can check for if you elect a wedding, just have a quick squiz and check the weather for your wedding as well, if you feel like it. Okay, so I'd like to say thank you very, very much. I wish we had a whole day and I could chat away, but wishes aren't horses. If you want my list of the basic signs, planets, and aspects for weather, then drop me an email at karenjames77@gmail.com. If you're interested in a weather course, and I'll start with a basic course and then possibly do a more advanced later. But if you're interested in a bit of a weather course, then also just drop me an email and let me know. And I also do mentoring, one-to-one mentoring via Zoom. I can help you set up your solar fire